Okay, welcome back. It looks like Project Power has made my qualifications for another episode of Rotten Reviews. Project Power is a Netflix exclusive right now. I saw it yesterday, and I believe it started streaming about 5 or 6 days ago. It has a very small number of audience reviews or ratings, 488 at the moment, and a 57% on that audience score. Of course, on the tomato meter, with 99 critics counted, it has 61%. Well, I'd say I largely agree with those numbers, and I don't think even if the user ratings go up another 1,000 that we're going to get this out of the 57% audience score range. So I'm going to continue on with a rotten review on this. And unfortunately, fortunately it gives me something to do with my rotten review series, but unfortunately I was actually hoping this film would surprise me. I was hoping that this Netflix film would surprise me, much like Charlize Theron's The Old Guard surprised me. I actually liked that film, and I wasn't thinking that I was going to. In fact, I thought I would be able to do a rotten review on that film, and surprise, surprise, I really liked it, and the score isn't rotten. Now, this one, well, it disappointed me because in the first 10 to 15 minutes, I thought, well, maybe this isn't going to be bad. I had my paper, my pen ready. My hand was ready to write down the first flaws and problems that I found, but no, 10, 12, about 15 minutes in, I was thinking, well, maybe I'm going to be surprised again. I haven't found anything obviously wrong with this. Well, then it subverted my expectations, and much like some other reviewers out there have mentioned, it kind of went off the rails. In short, it just couldn't decide what kind of movie it wanted to be. The premise was fantastic. There's a street drug out there. Pills are showing up on the street that are giving people either a superpower for 5 minutes or killing them in a gruesome way. And this could have gone a lot of different ways. I was thinking maybe it's something like Amazon's The Boys meets Limitless, for example. It could have gone in those directions, but instead it kind of squandered all the opportunities. And it was about 20 minutes in or so where I realized it couldn't make up its mind just who our main protagonist was going to be, who our hero was going to be. And as the running time increased, it just got worse and worse. As the running time increased, I realized there wasn't going to be enough time left to bring this all together, and it just kind of became an incoherent mess. Character believability suffered. It wanted to become a tearjerker at the end, and basically it didn't work at all. I just wasn't invested in it, and it's just too bad because the actors did well. You have Jamie Foxx playing one main character, and you have Joseph. I always mess up his name. Gordon-Levitt playing another main character, and I say that because you just don't know who the main character is supposed to be. It starts off with one and then switches to another and then switches back to the one, and neither of these so-called heroes or our main protagonists they're not on the same team. They're not together at the beginning of the film. It's not a buddy cop film. It's more like they're kind of both I wouldn't say anti-heroes, but they're almost borderline antagonists that are on their separate purposes, and then they kind of are forced together or kind of meet up together halfway through the film. And there's a young girl character who's a drug dealer that's kind of stuck between them as well. And I don't know, it's just like it's all over the place. And the superpower parts, it was disappointing. There weren't more of those. It turned out to be something other than I thought it would be. It's basically the story of an evil corporation testing out a drug for sale to the highest bidder. And it's very disappointing as some kind of superhero movie because it's really not a superhero movie. Now, with that 57% audience score, myself, I consider that fair. We don't have that many ratings, so I don't know how far we'll get into this. My standard rule is that I'm going to only entertain 3-star and below user reviews on this because I think that's more fair since this is rotten, and I'm going to ignore the higher reviews. And so I don't know how many we're actually going to find. So if we don't find enough, I have a backup plan for that. But we'll see if we have enough to figure out if I'm completely off base about this or what other people think. And I have a list. I have a list. It's not extensive. It's about, I don't know, half a page, barely half a page of real serious issues that the film has. I don't think there's any one serious thing that I could write down that would make this rotten. I think it's more like it just fails to connect. It fails to drive everything together. It fails to give you the sense that there's one unified goal that the protagonist or protagonist needs to accomplish. You just don't feel invested, and even the ending, although it has a concrete ending that's a happy ending, so to speak, it just doesn't feel like it's earned. It doesn't feel, I don't feel happy. I didn't feel something positive at the end of it. I just was left, well, okay, what else is on? And that's unfortunate. So I'm going to read specific problems I wrote down, but none of these, even the bulk of them together, are actually what destroyed this film for me. It was just like very bland, and it felt soulless, like it had no purpose, and that's something that isn't like captured uniquely in one sentence that I could write down. But let's get into the actual audience reviews. Not going to entertain the critics, of course, because I think the audience reviews are the only ones that really matter. Moving down until we find our first 2.5-star review from 1 hour ago. This movie has an interesting premise, a pill that gives people a power unique to them for 5 minutes. That's a great place to start writing a screenplay. Unfortunately, it immediately goes off the rails from there. Some shady organization, totally cliche by the way, is handing out these pills for free to drug dealers so that they can do a clinical trial on all the people who take it. How are they collecting their data? What value does that data even have? They never explain any of that. Well, yeah, I agree with this review. Basically, there's a nefarious corporate entity that's trying to sell these 5-minute superpower pills to like the black market as weapons, I suppose. They got this from military research that they kind of stole or they were a part of. And, you know, that sounds like a really cool premise. I could have written a really nice story along those lines. But for some reason, the script they had didn't have a really interesting story to carry this out. It just had that premise. Because, you know, some of the logic fails, like this reviewer mentions that, you know, this organization, whether it's a corporation or whatnot, they actually provided these pills to street-level drug dealers and just told them to go sell them to people for a price, and they were giving them to the dealers for free. And it was just an effort to like conduct some kind of experiment, some kind of clinical trial. That's what the actual organization called it, a clinical trial. But yeah, there was no data collection. It was just basically to see how much chaos it would create on the streets of New Orleans. This film is set in New Orleans. Not that it would have been any different film somewhere else. It really wouldn't have been. The setting of New Orleans is not really particularly important to this film at all. It's just, I guess it was a relatively inexpensive shooting location, so that's where it was. The problem with this, yeah, the logic, the basic logic behind the bad guys doesn't really work out, and the film never really tries to make it work out. And it's interesting also to note for me that the villains, all the villain characters in this, or I should say all the characters in this that are controlling the bad guys are women, which is a little unusual. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's pretty rare that I've heard of organized crime outfits and corporate conspiracies being ran solely by authoritarian female figures. It's pretty rare. I mean, in film, sure, but in the real world, we are treated in this movie to an organized crime boss, even separately than the corporate entity with the pills. There's an organized crime outfit that's actually run by a mafia boss that's a woman. And while not impossible, I just found it a little odd that all the bad guy controllers are the bad bosses are all women. And along with that, our good guys aren't really good guys. You know, they just skirt the edge of being bad guys. They're not people that you would consider role models. One of them's a cop, played by Joseph uh, Levitt Gordon, if I'm doing his name right. He's a cop, but he's kind of a dirty, cheating, bad cop, almost like somebody you don't like on top of it. And he doesn't want to follow the rules, but he's buying these pills from drug dealers on the street, so he's pretty much technically he's a criminal. And Jamie Foxx's character is an ex-military. Um, I don't know if he was an officer or he was enlisted, but he ended up being a lab rat for the military, and he was exposed to the research that made these pills. He's looking to get his daughter, who's been kidnapped by this organization because she's got powers inherited from him, and he goes about just wantingly murdering people in the process of this, and he's definitely not a good guy, despite that we're supposed to feel something for him, we're supposed to relate to him. And so that's why I say these two main characters, that the movie can't really decide on which one's the main character, right? Um, we don't even really see them as good. They're trying to tell us they are, but really I just find them to be bad guys too. So that's a big problem with this. I think maybe somebody else might mention that as we move along. 3 stars, 2 hours ago. The beginning was everything. Yeah, the beginning of this, it was great. Like I said, it wasn't until 15 minutes in that I said, something about this just doesn't feel right. And I think some of that's the actual budget. This is a straight to Netflix thing. I don't know if it was developed by Netflix or this was something that was supposed to be released, but because of maybe COVID-19 or something else, it just didn't get a theatrical release. But if this had been released in the theaters, it would have bombed big time because, it's one thing to see this for free on a streaming service you already pay for, but if you went into the theater with this, yeah, people would be really angry about it because it just doesn't have the budget, and you can tell with some of the minor characters and the dialogue and the way they show things going on that they just didn't have the budget. Despite having some adequate special effects in other places, there just wasn't a budget to make this feel totally real. The background type of stuff didn't feel that real. So yeah, as a theatrical release, this would have failed. But as it is, it's just streaming on Netflix. 3 stars. I don't like so much. Don't regreed my attention, but it is a good time spent to watch it. Well, English isn't their first language. I guess you could say it's 3 stars if you're not expecting much. And like I said, if you're already paying for Netflix and this is not costing you anything more but your time, it's not going to anger you. It might be okay for some people, but considering that this has like big time stars in it that have been in a lot of theatrical releases, and a lot of the minor characters have too. Yeah, this would be really bad if it had been put out in the theater. This would have been a bomb. So maybe it's fortunate that the theaters aren't open for this. In any case, moving along to our second page, a lot of 4 and 5 star reviews, right? So a lot of people, this is just fine by them. I'm not one of those people, and according to the audience review, there's more bad reviews than good ones here, or there's just as many bad as good to get that 50-something% score. So not reading those 4 star reviews. 3 stars. It had the budget and cast, but needed much better pacing and direction. Wanted to like it more, but had so many issues towards the end that pulled me out of the movie. Like, how is a dude that is clearly visible run out the front door of a robbed bank surrounded by cops and escape? Yeah, it had a scene in which a bank robber had taken one of these 5-minute superpower pills to make himself into a chameleon, to give him like predator-like powers where nobody could see him. He's perfectly camouflaged, and yet everybody could see him. I could see him. The cop in the story, one of our main characters that responded to the bank robbery, he could clearly see him and chased him down, no problem. So it was a little bit strange, like, what good did the pill do him? And a couple of these superpowered villains were like that had taken these pills. They took these pills, but yet it didn't seem to help them much. They would have been better off committing their crimes just like the way we do in the real world, instead of messing around with these pills that don't seem to work in a lot of cases. And that was part of the story, that the pills actually killed a lot of people randomly. Instead of giving you a power, there was a chance they would just make your head explode or something else gruesome happen. But I don't think that was part of the fact. I don't think that was part of the flaw with some of these people that the pills were working on. I think some of them, it's just the writers did a bad job of showing how the pills would advantage them in criminal ways. Maybe the writers just didn't, the premise was cool, but they didn't have writers able to really make this work for the bad guys, because really it didn't seem to work out too well for them, even when the movie was trying to convince me that it was working for them. And so they're mentioning that. Um, they continue here. How is the CIA organized enough to run secret tests in New Orleans, but dumb enough to let someone walk into their demonstration meeting unnoticed, or have the source of their product line just sitting in an unguarded room? Yeah, I found that a problem too, and I wrote it down a couple of times. There are a couple of different scenes in the movie in which this organized, in one case, it's the organized crime and the corporate bad guys, and they're having a meeting. In another case, it's just this corporate entity that has a safe location, a distribution point for this drug. And it's like they have no security and no backup plan and no real plan for if somebody shows up or the cops would show up. It's just like security is just an afterthought to them. And our protagonists, including a young girl, are able to just stroll right up like there's no problem. They're not challenged at all. And there's just a guy at a desk sitting there like saying, oh, okay, what do you need? Um, I'm sorry, but in the real world, bad guys actually have security, and they don't just sit there behind a desk with an unlocked door. And it was the same with the mafia meeting. Like, you could just stroll into this bar where they're having the meeting, and nobody had a problem with this, as long as, in this film, Jamie Foxx's character actually kills the doorman, and after killing the doorman, he does something to the security, and he gets into the meeting, and nobody happens to have a problem with him just standing there listening to everybody talk in their meeting. A lot of it was like that, and I wrote it down in different ways, and I'm not going to read it off specifically off my list, but they're mentioning it. It just wasn't believable. You just kind of were distracted by this and not fully into it as a result. Yeah, the product was actually, this expensive pill that's got millions of dollars worth of military contracted research into it. It had very little security. The company had no problem handing it out to street level drug dealers for free. Um, yeah, it was kind of far-fetched in a lot of ways like that. Um, let's see, moving on. 2 stars, pretentious, unoriginal. Yeah, that's rotten. Pretentious, unoriginal. Yeah, pretentious in the way it expected us to feel sympathy between Jamie Foxx's character and this young girl, and the actress who plays her I've never seen before, so I'm not going to care to look her name up. I didn't think she did a bad job, and I didn't think that Jamie Foxx did a bad job, but I think the script had them trying to develop some kind of father-daughter romance, or not romance, but father-daughter relationship. And I kind of wrote it down as like a rapper romance, because they kind of bonded over the fact that the young girl was trying to be a rap star. She's like a young girl in junior high, but she had dreams of becoming a rapper, and she demonstrated this to Jamie Foxx. And this went on for quite a while, and it wasn't really good, and it didn't really lead to anything, and it was supposed to convince us that they were going to get this father-daughter bond, that later at the end of the film we would shed some tears over this. It didn't work at all, and that's really when it started to come apart for me, and I was starting to write things down, because it was just not bad acting, but bad script, bad dialogue, and the pacing was off. Like, the story completely slowed down to try to force this father-daughter thing on us, and it just didn't work. It didn't work at all. But it wasn't the fault of the actors. It was definitely the writers that screwed it up. Half a star. I created an account just to give it a rating. It was that bad. It was only interesting in the sense that you want to see what powers people have. Besides that, I have no real interest in it. Well, unfortunately, you didn't get to see a lot of those powers. I think you got to see 4 or 5. And they weren't put to any particular good use. One guy used his chameleon power to rob a bank, but it wasn't convincing. I already mentioned that. The second one we saw was a guy that would kind of burst into flames, like become a Human Torch, like the Human Torch, for example, in the Fantastic Four. However, his body was actually scarred and burned up as a result of this, and that was confusing too, because you couldn't tell if he was feeling pain while he was, becoming the Human Torch, or whether it was going to kill him if he did this for more than a few minutes at a time, or whether it was, it was very confusing in that regard. Like, it wasn't as much a superpower as something you wouldn't want to have have happen to yourself. And on top of that, the Human Torch guy, he was a drug dealer, a higher level drug dealer from the young girl. He was her boss, and he didn't really put this to any good use. It didn't seem to save him from Jamie Foxx. It didn't seem to. It actually seemed to cause him more problems than it actually solved. So, as a superpower, it was a pretty poor use of it, and that's again a fail of the writing. And then we saw the next superpower. I believe it was one of the next was one of the henchmen could take this pill and it didn't seem to do anything to him. But then after he was shot dead, his bullet would push, or his body would push the bullets out and heal, and then he would get back up again. That wasn't real impressive. It was kind of like a really cheesy Wolverine power, but not impressive and also not very useful, because if you're shot dead, even if you do come back to life after a few minutes, that doesn't really do you much good when you're in the middle of committing a criminal act, does it? It's kind of like not an effective superpower. And then the next one after that was a woman that took the pill and turned into like Mr. Freeze character, or she had the ability to lower her body temperature to freezing, which really wasn't an ability so much as it killed her without having some kind of heat source to keep her from dying, because she just turned into a popsicle and died, and it was kind of gruesome to watch. And not exactly something I would want as a superpower. Like, what's the point of that? It's like a horrific way to just commit suicide. But it looked good with the CGI. That's about it. We saw another superpower where a guy turned into a grotesque, gigantic, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde character. Like, he was half troll, half human, and disgusting, and he was smashing things up like the Hulk. And that didn't seem like a very effective criminal power either, because it also looked like it might be fatal at some point. Yeah, not very impressed with the writing on this. It's like they put writers on this that really didn't know what to do with superpowers. Maybe they should have had one writer from some other project that actually was a superpower movie. Maybe that would have helped, like maybe a writer from the X-Men or something. Of course, maybe the movie just didn't have that kind of budget. Another half-star review from 12 hours ago. Another poor effort for Netflix. A poor script, one-dimensional characters, every action movie trope, cheap, poor, and so predictable. I am sick of watching great actors in movies where I feel most of their budget went on their salaries and so little on production quality and writing. I never reviewed this on this site before, but I cannot watch this dreadful movie. Although no worse than Six Underground, which I could not even get through when on an indoor bicycle. Such a waste of life. Well, I don't think I did Six Underground because it doesn't actually have a rotten audience score, but I kind of wanted to be honest with you. I got through it, but I wasn't impressed, but it doesn't qualify, at least it didn't the last time I worked, to be on an episode of Rotten Reviews. Now this does, but they've got another point here. The thing about the Netflix movies, like some of them like stand out and they're surprising. Like, for example, The Old Guard. This one, it's just like it had probably, I don't know, it seemed like it had about the same budget and it had the same caliber of actors in it, but it just couldn't come together. And when you say it's another poor effort for Netflix, or when this reviewer does, it's kind of nebulous there. Like, you don't know if Netflix was actually involved in the production, or if this is just something Netflix purchased or was optioned to Netflix, or they bid on it at some point. That's the problem. Like when it shows up on Netflix, people do just lump them all together like they're Netflix projects, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Maybe this wasn't a Netflix project. I just don't know. I don't have the time to research it, but you have to remember that things that show up on Netflix doesn't mean it was made by Netflix. They might have just been stuck with it or had to take it to get something else, or maybe they bid on it and they were the lowest bidder or the only bidder. Who knows? Half a star. I have seen a lot of movies, but not as shit as this. I've seen a lot that are worse. If I had to give this a star rating, which I do, I would say it just hits 2 stars. 1.5 is what I want to give it, but I say 2 because it had a great premise. I didn't shut it off. Although I kind of wanted to fast forward through some of it, like where they were chasing each other through the bottom of a cargo or a freighter ship for quite a while, and it wasn't that exciting. I kind of wanted to fast forward through that, and that's in the final act of the movie. but it was close enough to the end that I didn't. So I'll give it an actual 2 stars, but barely. Half a star, it's not quite that bad. Half a star would have shut it off after 10 minutes. Or stuck around to make a funny rotten review on it to make fun of it. Half a star, ridiculous plot, unbelievable, and therefore boring. Well, it was only really unbelievable in that it couldn't really tell us, it couldn't tell the audience definitively how we were supposed to tell when a superpower was a superpower or when it was actually not a superpower, when it was actually something fatal, because it kind of mixed those two things together a few times. So that's what made it a little bit unbelievable, because it needed to make up its mind. And it also needed to make up its mind on who we were supposed to be rooting for and if there even was a good guy. And I say good guy with quotes around it because I'm not sure there even was anybody in this film that could be called one of the good guys. Even the young junior high school girl, she's bad enough in her own ways that, like, I wouldn't consider her good. I mean, maybe when she grows up she'll be good, but at the point she's in this movie, she's basically just a drug dealer, and she's like not even interested in paying attention in class, and she's looks like she's going to end up in prison sooner or later or dead, regardless of the events of this movie. 3 stars, 17 hours ago. Visually stunning at times, then completely nonsensical. A fun watch on a Saturday night, but ultimately nothing worth seeing. Again, 6 out of 10. That's kind of a contradictory review, isn't it? They're saying 6 out of 10, 3 stars, but then they're saying it's not worth seeing again. I'm going to say that's a negative review because I don't think it's worth seeing again either, and I sure as hell wouldn't give it 3 stars. If I say 3 stars, I might watch it again at some point. Do I think it's worth a fun watch on Saturday evening? No, I don't. I think there are a lot better things to do on Saturday night. Maybe if it's like Tuesday morning and you're homesick from work because you've got the COVID or something, sure, why not? But don't waste your Saturday night over this. Definitely not. And look at that 5 star at the bottom of the screen in all caps. I don't believe that for a second, and I'm not going to repeat it out loud. Let's go on to the next page. Wow, 4 and 5 star reviews. Wow, wow, wow. 3 stars from 19 hours ago. The premise for this movie is awesome, and the casting of Fox and Gordon-Levitt is great. There are some cool special effects and some good action. I just couldn't fully get into the story, and while this is good, it doesn't quite live up to the potential. Yeah, I disagree on the 3 stars, and I'm certain that the reason that this person couldn't get into it that much is for the same reason I couldn't. The script just doesn't convince you that these characters should be together or care about each other, or that we should feel some tears come out of our eyes at the end when the movie tells us they're supposed to. And the relationship between Jamie Foxx's character, his name is Frank, I believe, and his daughter that he's going to try to save, you don't feel any of that either. And so when they're reunited at the end and there's a scene, like an actual very final scene of them driving off together, you don't feel a damn thing, because nothing convinced you that any of this should mean anything. And it's not the actors, it's just the script didn't have them doing anything that was believable. And their dialogue, there was a lot of dialogue, but it was the wrong dialogue, let's put it that way. 2 stars. Fast-paced actioner about a power pill that can give you 5 minutes of superpower. Ridiculous premise, terrible choppy editing during action sequences, waste of 2 fine actors in general, passable as mindless entertainment. Now, I'll largely agree with that. Now, what they're saying, somebody finally mentioned this, is they're calling it terrible choppy editing. I called it, what did I call it? I called it too many experimental camera shots are distracting me from getting into this. And what I mean is not just Dutch angles, but every kind of weird experimental shot that somebody could come up with a, they had some time on their hands and just decided to do unconventional camera shots. There's a time and place for this, but this movie does it way too much, and it doesn't do anything except pull you out of the story and make you think that, wow, somebody's trying to be fancy, and I can't, you're so worried about how fancy your camera work is, but you're not worried about giving us convincing dialogue between the characters, and you just can't get into it. Somebody really wanted to show off that they've got some mind for experimental camera work, but you can't have a film that's just all experimental camera work. It's just overwhelming, and it wasn't that effective to begin with. Like I said, there's time and place for it, but not everywhere throughout the movie in every type of scene. Didn't work for me, and that was a big thing on my list. And speaking of my list, chronologically, let's just run it through it real quick here. How did the girl get Fox into the clinic? Yeah, there's a scene in which Jamie Foxx is kind of not killed, but nearly killed. And the girl is the only person that can save him, and he begs her to save him, despite the fact that he's a bad guy to her. Well, she happens to have a mom that works at a veterinary clinic, animal hospital of some type. And the next scene opens with Jamie Foxx slumped on a table in the vet clinic, and she's like sewing up one of his wounds, suturing him. And presumably her mom had taught her this skill. It's a stretch, but you can assume, okay, maybe for some reason her mom taught her this. I don't know why she would, but let's say she hung out there and her mom taught her how to sew up an animal. It's a stretch, but okay. If we go with that, that's not the real problem. The real problem is Jamie Foxx is a full-grown man. He's bigger than I am. I don't know his exact weight, but let's say it's 180 something. How does this 12, 13-year-old girl, how does she get him from even out in the car or off the street into that position in the vet clinic? He was unconscious, and it shows him waking up on the table and freaking out, and then her basically telling him in not so many words that she brought him there. How did she do this? I'm sorry, but even I would have trouble bringing Jamie Foxx to that position by myself with him totally unconscious. So I guess the movie's trying to make us come up with a reason in our mind that maybe he was half dazed and she helped him there and then he passed out there, but it doesn't show you that. It pretty much is just hand waving this away, and I thought it was just too distracting not to write down, but apparently um, somebody else happened to hit upon this. You know, Actually, maybe nobody else has hit on this yet. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. It was just in my notes, and we haven't seen somebody mention this yet. But I consider that an actual plot hole. Next on my list, dialogue is unfocused at times. Yeah, it meanders around about rapping and all this other stuff, and it doesn't get to the point. It just kind of bores us. Like a lot of other things, it kind of meanders around. It doesn't seem to know what it's driving towards at all times. So the dialogue, I mentioned that a few times, it becomes overly grotesque. Like the effects are good, but they're overly grotesque, like something you would see in a horror movie, and it just has a horror movie vibe to it. And this isn't supposed to be a horror movie, and it doesn't fit, and it's in a few places like this. Um, Jamie Foxx's character Frank, his motives are not well portrayed. Yeah, it does. It takes a long time. It takes a long time to tell the audience that he's going after his daughter, and even then, it's not convincing because he does things that are kind of like he's not really doing that. He's doing something else, and I don't know if this is like something about the movie was re-edited or whatnot, but it's almost like they they put it in at the last minute that he's going after his daughter. There was something else going on because his actions and his speech and his dialogue with his, with his co-stars, they don't really drive to this. It's like he forgets what how would you forget? Like if you're going after your kidnapped daughter, this is going to be number one on your list out of everything else in the world, and the end of the movie certainly ends that way. Yet everywhere else in the film, it's like Jamie Foxx kind of forgets that's what he's there to do. It slips his mind, and that's not the way it works. It's bad writing. Here's another plot problem. The lady villain, I call her Lady Villain because I don't recall if her name was even told to us. She's the one running this presumably corporate contractor, this evil corporate contractor outfit. She's the big boss, and she doesn't choose to kill Jamie Foxx when he, in the last act of the movie, shows up to screw up her plans and kills a bunch of her henchmen and makes a mess on her cargo ship and where she's got her lab. And all she had to do is kill him, but she doesn't. She needs to give him a cliche villain speech, and then take him down below, where she tells the henchmen to eventually kill him. after they extract DNA from him, but she already had his DNA, so what was the point of that? It was just, the whole point of it was just to have her have some flimsy excuse not to kill him so he could escape and continue on in, killing the bad guys. It was something we've seen done in other action movies where the big bad boss, even in some James Bond movies, they can't just kill you. They have to make it done in some convoluted way so that you guaranteed have a chance to escape. This is really bad. Makes no sense. She should have just shot him immediately. In fact, all of her henchmen were trying to kill him outright. Yet she doesn't. When she has the chance, she decides to just give him a little villain lady speech and give him a chance to escape by locking him up in the cargo hold. Yep, really bad. It's probably the worst thing in this film because it's been done so much in other B movies and it's just so damn obvious to anybody. What's next on my list? For such a unique concept, nothing much unique actually happens. And other people have said this in these Rotten reviews or in these Rotten Tomatoes reviews. Yeah, it is a unique premise in a lot of ways, and yet we don't see anything else unique. Even the transformations of people into these grotesque, superpowered villains, it's not unique. We've seen this stuff before in horror movies too, and nothing is done with it that's unique. I mean, a chameleon guy robs a bank. Wow, that's boring, and it was boring. And the whole movie's like that. It has, any other writer, it would seem, would find something unique to do with this, but whoever wrote this, if there was one or more writers, I don't know, but they just had no imagination whatsoever when they had this premise under their control. What's next? Feels too long for its scope. Yeah, the scope of this movie is very small. It feels like it's very small in scope in all ways, probably because of the budget. But the plot itself doesn't unfold anywhere except on the streets and harbor of New Orleans. And so it's got such a limited scope and takes place in small locations and indoor locations that are small. And not a lot of stuff happens anywhere else. In fact, nothing happens anywhere else. So why is it so long? Like, it feels like the movie could be cut down into an even shorter film. It feels like it should have, with all the running time, which I don't know what the exact running time is. Can we, let's go back and take a look at that. Exact running time, 111 minutes, yeah. They couldn't make do with 90 minutes. They couldn't make do with 85. I've seen films with small scopes like this, 85, not even, 80 minutes even, and they do good jobs. Good films, 80-minute films that are good. This thing, it doesn't have enough material in it. It doesn't have enough scope of anything going on to justify 111 minutes. Somebody should have hacked a whole big piece of this out, like including the scenes where Jamie Foxx is like bonding with the daughter. We didn't have to have that because he had a daughter already. Why did he have to bond with this junior high school girl? And it wasn't convincing, and it went on a long time with just them doing like a rap battle thing, and I called it a rap romance of some kind, and it was just pointless. That and other things should have been cut out. Let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, final thing on my list. Can't decide on a hero. Both male leads are close to being antagonists. Yeah, I led with that on this review because, yeah, I'm wondering throughout this whole thing, are we going to get a main guy here? Because at first I thought it was going to be Gordon-Levitt, but then all of a sudden it goes to Jamie Foxx. Then it said, oh, here's our guy. But he wasn't even a good guy. He's borderline on a bad guy. And then it switched back to, it switched to the girl for a while. So I thought, okay, maybe the girl's our person. And then, nope, it couldn't make up its mind. And none of these are good guys or good people. And I'm going to go to one more page. One more page. 1 star. 20 hours ago. Absolutely no redeeming qualities about this movie. The writing and directing are so bad it makes Gordon-Levitt, Hewitt, and Jamie Foxx look like C-list actors. Well, yeah, it does, because the script and the dialogue make them look like shit, but they're really not doing a bad job. They're doing an adequate job. They've done adequate jobs before. It's just the script is so fucking terrible and the dialogue is. But, right off the top here, I want to say Yeah, I'm not the only one that has a problem pronouncing the name of the male lead. Here we see Gordon-Levitt, Levin Hewitt. So take mercy on me. I'm not the only one that has a problem getting his name right. If it were me, just a nitpick, I probably would have picked a different name for myself because you don't want people to be like, you know what I mean? Not being able to pronounce your name, and it's not just me apparently. But anyway, seriously, it's bad. Watched until the end for two reasons. I wanted to see if it could rise above itself in the end. It didn't. I wanted to be able to write a review having watched the entire movie. I did, regrettably. Now I can agree with that. I wanted to fast forward just to the end to see if anything did happen, and I didn't because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything really stupid to talk about, and I didn't miss anything really stupid. It was just boring. 2 stars, taken with a comedic twist. No, if there had been humor, it might have been something if they had made this from the point of view of a comedy. And they probably could have because they almost went horror in a few places. So they could have made this into a comedy. You would have had to still have real writers come in and fix the damn dialogue, though, that's for sure, and somebody that could make it funny. 3 stars. In a nutshell, this is the third movie collaboration between Machine Gun Kelly and directors Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost. Okay. The power in this project is the two powerhouse actors Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, plus a surprising young starlet, Dominique Fishback. Dominique Fishback is the young girl. I haven't seen her before. If this is supposed to showcase her work, uh, it doesn't. So I hope there's something else out there that demonstrates her work because the script in this just makes everybody look like shit, unfortunately. I've read some reviews that think this movie is terrible, but I disagree. It's definitely not perfect, but it serves as an entertaining distraction and something new to watch on Netflix during this pandemic when we've seen just about, I'm going to presume he's going to say just about everything. I highly doubt anybody's seen just about everything. They're not looking hard enough, and even on Netflix. And anybody that says this isn't bad and that it's actually 3 stars or it's a good film because it proves that it's a great distraction. No, I can open a game of Minecraft and get a great distraction. Almost anything can be a great distraction, so I'm going to have to say I call bullshit on that. So let's move on. 1.5 stars, August 15, 2020. Just boring. Decent effects, but a lackluster. Seen it all before. Plot wastes a great cast. Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. 2 stars. Another of Netflix's big bets is the one that came to us this Friday. This is Project Power, the movie starring Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman, who provide a great staging in this film. With great camera handling and spectacular action sequences. Really? You call experimental camera work that's distracting great camera work? Well, maybe if you're into experimental camera work. Great staging, I guess you mean the premise. A premise is pretty easy to write. I've got a notebook filled with them. It's like 1 or 2 sentences, but you still need the plot and the characters and everything else to make it work. With spectacular action sequences. No, there weren't. No, there weren't they weren't the shittiest, but they're buddy cop movies with like B movies with better action sequences. There's nothing here that you wouldn't see on a mediocre episode of something on the CW. There's nothing spectacular here at all. Um, you know, and remember, they're giving this a 2 star review. Keep that in mind with all these big words they're using. However, it is not enough to save a script that is not as promising as one expected. It is a film that at times becomes somewhat tedious. Yeah, it needed to be cut down to like 80 minutes or so. The look that the script seeks to give a twist to the superhero thing. Twist, well, it could have been awesome if it was like I said, I thought maybe we could have a combination of The Boys and Limitless. That would be awesome. I can come up with a whole bunch of scenarios that would work. I could probably come up with a script too. I mean, if I were into writing scripts, which I'm not. Uh, it wouldn't be that challenging for a lot of people. I don't know what happened here. It was just really lazy, really, really lazy, disappointing. And, again, don't say it's Netflix big bet. I'm not so sure Netflix, made this completely or, maybe they purchased it. Who knows? When you say Netflix big bet, it's like you're saying they commissioned this, they put the money forward to make this, and I'm not so sure. I could be wrong, maybe they did, but on a lot of projects they don't. They're just optioned. They were supposed to go to the theater, they were supposed to be different things, and Netflix decided to take them. So that's about it. We have Project Power, and it's like drained a lot of my power today. 57% on the audience score. I think that's perfectly valid. 61% on the tomato meter. I don't know why it's so high. You know, critics just rip things apart that are much better than this. We could take a look at that. You know, we can actually take a look at what are the critics saying? Well, the ones that have tomatoes, let's see, an entertaining revenge movie. See, yeah, an entertaining revenge movie, but the dark and weird material is rendered without enough regard for that potential. Yeah, see, that's the thing. Critics thinking this is a revenge movie? Almost. You know, I mentioned before, Jamie Foxx is supposed to be rescuing his daughter, but yeah, it does kind of seem like he just wants revenge, not necessarily on the boss villain that took his daughter, but just on anybody that gets in his way. Against just people that just rub him the wrong way. And so the movie couldn't figure out what his motivations were. And I think the critic here is like kind of giving us a clue too. It's not a revenge movie, although it has elements of that. And it's not like just a saving his daughter type film. It fails at both of those. But what does the other critic think down here that gave it a fresh rating? The undercooked plot works just well enough to fuel this vehicle. The undercooked plot. That sounds like a rotten review. So here's another fresh one. Looks more like an actual $80 million movie than the Old Guard did, a $70 million one. This person's like on the opposite. They're living in an alternate reality for me, because I think the Old Guard was surprisingly good and this one is crap. So they've got that backwards. In any case, it looks like some of these are actually rotten reviews, but for some reason they're considered fresh. That's a thing on Rotten Tomatoes, unfortunately, with some movies. You'll see that where they don't seem to belong in the right category. So as a result, we have a 61% on the tomato meter. Sorry, I disagree. If I saw a 20% on the tomato meter, I would think it was valid. So there's that. In any case, I'm going to call this a wrap, and I will see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.